Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him.
I'm sure we all know the story of Joseph. It was possibly one of the earliest stories from the Old Testament we were told as children. It's always been a favourite, and its popularity was increased by the musical about Joseph's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We know that Joseph was the youngest of 11 sons, and that his brothers hated him, partly because he was his father's favourite, born to Jacob's second wife Rachel, but also because of the dreams he had, which inferred that his brothers would bow down to him. Being, I would imagine, a somewhat precocious child, he didn't keep these dreams to himself, but told his brothers, which only angered them further. We know how Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers, then later thrown into prison, but how he eventually triumphed to become the Pharaoh's right-hand man. It's a wonderful story of betrayal, sibling rivalry, and dysfunctional family relationships. But through all his many trials, Joseph kept an unwavering faith in God and knew that everything that happened to him had a purpose, even though he couldn't see it at the time. Chris and I have been watching a fascinating series called The Queen and Us. It's in 7 episodes, each episode dedicated to a decade of the Queen's reign. It charts the changes, both in this country and the world, during her 70 years on the throne. The series shows how, during those often turbulent years, the Queen provided a continuous thread of stability and continuity. The series has naturally been of interest to Chris and I as we've lived through those decades. Many years ago, I was often away from home, filming children's television dramas. During the filming, there was often periods of inactivity. Times, especially during night shoots, when complex lighting would be set up, when I'd be sitting around doing not a lot. During one of those periods, a costume supervisor introduced me to patchwork. And after that, I would carry a small bag full of bits of cut-out cardboard, scraps of material, needle and thread, whenever I went filming, along with my script, clipboard, stopwatch, and all the paraphernalia required by my job. Material came from many sources, and over time the sewn-together sections grew. Eventually, there was enough to form a bedspread. I bought some backing, sewed it on, and it's covered our guest room bed for over 40 years. It's faded now, but when I look at it, each piece of material brings back memories. The dark blue and white ones were cutouts of Laura Ashley curtains we had in our flat in Chiswick in our early days of marriage. There are remnants of Chris's shirts we bought in Hong Kong when I managed to export him for a brief holiday in 1976 after I'd finished filming there. There are pieces of Charles and Di material I patriotically bought to make a skirt at the time of their wedding in 1981. Scraps from my mother, who made all the clothes for my sister and myself. Scraps with tiny teddy bear motifs from my friend. I didn't sew it to any pre-worked out pattern, but every small piece tells a story. Pieces of my past, pieces of my history. There's a pattern there, as there is in my life, but only God can see the full picture. It's summed up in a song some of you might remember called Tapestry by Carole King, which begins, "My life has been a tapestry of rich and royal hue, an everlasting vision of the ever-changing view, a wondrous woven magic in bits of blue and gold, a tapestry to see and feel, impossible to hold. This part of the festive season can be a flat time, perhaps between visits of family over Christmas and a second wave of visits over the New Year. It should be a joyful time, but it isn't always so. For many, it can be a very stressful time. Family situations that have perhaps gone wrong in some way, old hurts and grievances brought out of the cupboard where they've lain and festered for years, broken relationships. It can be a very lonely time for many, not only for those on their own, but even for those in the middle of a family gathering. So perhaps in this lull between Christmas and the New Year, we might like to look back and reflect on our lives and see what we so often can't, a pattern. We might like to think about how we can mend what is broken, how we can restore relationships, how we can forgive and be forgiven.
Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no ploughing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God."
Perhaps one of the reasons why the story of Joseph is so popular is because it's so satisfying, the restoration of relationships. It became clear to Joseph that his varied and colourful life had one continuous thread running through it, that thread being God. A coat cannot be created without thread. A life cannot be created without God. Thread holds a coat together. God holds our lives together. Amen.